Hello everyone, I'm Dalina Bădescu, an art historian and artist. Today I want to talk about something very important, but also completely left aside when our politicians decide how our education system looks like, how we used to learn about art back in the day versus now, and what that means for us today. You see, in the classic educational model, art wasn't something you just dabbled in right away. First, you had to learn grammar, memorize concepts, and build a foundation. Basically, you had to fill up your intellectual toolbox before you could even think about making art. It's like putting together a puzzle without the picture on the box, pieces scattered everywhere, but eventually, things started making sense. Once students got past that first stage, they entered a new level of learning. This is where things got interesting. Literature, art, history, religion. These subjects weren't just names on a curriculum. They were the battlegrounds of logic and rhetoric. Discussions happened through the lens of classical texts, and slowly students learned to think critically, argue persuasively, and connect ideas. Art, like literature, was essential. It wasn't just a fun side activity. It was fundamental to intellectual development, a key ingredient in shaping how people saw and understood the world around them. Now here's the thing, classic education wasn't just about creating functional members of society, it was also about elevating knowledge to an abstract, almost sacred level. Quadrivium, that's the fancy name for the final educational phase, opened doors to fields like mathematics, music, astronomy, and later, the philosophy of natural sciences. And where did art fit in all this? Right at the heart of it. The goal of studying art wasn't just about making pretty things. It was about creating a mental space where human consciousness could truly express itself. It was about giving people a cultural backbone, a set of fundamental truths they could build upon. But it didn't stop there. Art wasn't just a theoretical exercise. It was a living, breathing force, continuously evolving. Music, architecture, and later applied arts took this cultural legacy and turned it into something dynamic. And if you look back at how artists were trained, well, it was intense. You didn't just grab a paintbrush and call yourself an artist. First, you had to master the grammar of painting, learning how to prepare pigments, handle brushes, mix colors. Then came drawing, studying the masters, essentially having a dialogue with the deep essence of visual creation. Only after years of this disciplined training could a student move on to adding their own voice, their own signature to their work. For centuries, this is how things worked. The master-apprentice system was a given. You worked, you learned, you imitated until you had something of your own to say. But then the 19th century came along and suddenly things changed. Art stepped into everyday life. The whole elaborate structure of the artist's studio, the years of careful training, was boiled down to a portable easel and a paint box. Impressionists broke the mold, painting in the open air, democratizing art in a way that made it feel accessible to everyone. Suddenly anyone could become an artist, or at least that's how it seemed. Now that sounds great, right? But here's where the real twist comes in. With this artistic freedom came a big challenge. How do you maintain quality when the rules are shifting? The answer? Education, not just for artists, but for the public too. The people viewing the art needed to be trained to understand it, just like the artists needed to be trained to create it. And this is where modernism enters the picture, arguably one of the most intellectual artistic movements ever. Think about it. Baudelaire, Apollinaire, Breton, Duchamp, Mondrian, Kandinsky, all these legendary names weren't just making art. They were writing about it, theorizing it, explaining it in ways that echoed the classical tradition of deep, structured thought. And then we hit postmodernism. And this is where things take a radical turn, because suddenly it wasn't just about questioning artistic techniques, it was about questioning the entire system Logic was thrown out the window in Dadaism, rhetoric was flipped upside down in surrealism, and grammar, well, that got broken down to its most basic elements in movements like futurism and cubism. But, and this is important, it all still stayed rooted in the classical intellectual tradition. Even when artists were rebelling against the past, they were still in conversation with it. But here's where the real break happens. Totalitarian regimes, especially communism, didn't just change how people lived. They completely reshaped education. They dismantled the classical system, and with it, the values it upheld. Authority figures, professors, intellectuals were questioned and eventually stripped of their status. The hierarchy flipped, and suddenly teachers weren't seen as guides but as equals. Art education took a hit too. Instead of learning the fundamentals first, students were encouraged to create before they even understood the language of art. The result? A generation of artists with no real foundation, lost in a system that had erased the very tools they needed to navigate it. And it doesn't stop there. Postmodernism didn't just reject classical education, it tried to erase the past entirely. Suddenly the world was painted as a product of historical injustice, something to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. The result? Art became fragmented, politicized. Contemporary art stopped being a conversation with history and turned into a tool for ideology. And the figures pushing these new narratives, not artists, not creators, but theorists. Adorno, Benjamin, Derrida, Foucault, names that didn't shape art with their hands but with their words. So, where does that leave us? Well, we're in a moment where both art and its audience have changed dramatically. Without logic and rhetoric, viewers don't even know how to engage with contemporary art anymore. Instead of questioning it, they just step back, they leave it alone. And in doing so, they walk away from something much bigger than just paintings or sculptures. They walk away from a fundamental part of what makes us human. Thus, the quality of official contemporary art has dramatically declined, promoting dissolute forms lacking aesthetic value. Both the quality of contemporary official art has plummeted, promoting ideologized artists' dissolute and aesthetically void forms, and the quality of the general public's perception, as well as that of critics and art theorists, has deteriorated. Without the exercise of logic and rhetoric, the viewer prefers to remain silent, to accept the ridiculous, and to quietly but definitively withdraw from contemporary art, and not only that, but also from that essential part of their being, which, along with history, literature, and religion, once constituted the foundation of the human spirit. What do you think? I invite you to reflect together, and until next time, I encourage you to look around carefully and not hesitate to say when necessary that the emperor is naked.